Good morning again. On behalf of the Jewish Federation Israel Center, welcome to Exploring the Land, Crossroads of Our Faith. I'm Karen Rader, and we also have Jody Girth from the Federation who will be helping as well. Today's session is being recorded, and we will forward the link to you later this week. Since we are a large group, we are asking everyone to remain on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat and we will get to as many as possible. We will stop to answer questions midway through the presentation and again toward the end. I'd like to introduce our guide, Gadi Ben Dov. Gadi was born in the US, raised on a kibbutz in the Galilee, and now lives in the center of Israel. Gadi became a licensed tour guide after finishing his IDF service as an officer and traveling the world. His love of the land and especially the people of Israel have given him insights into the country that he shares with every visitor. And most importantly, Gadi has guided our last 3 interfaith couples missions in Israel, and this past summer, our first virtual family Israel experience. So, fasten your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables are in their upright and locked position, and we will begin our tour of Jerusalem. Welcome, Gadi.
Very good. Thank you very much, Karen and Jody, and shalom, everyone from St. Louis, and maybe not from St. Louis. There might be some people from other parts of the country. But at any rate, we are about to get going here on our tour. And this is the first of 4 tours, I believe, that we're going to have together. So this is exciting. We've spread them out a little bit so you guys can process everything. But the bottom line is that we'll have time for questions. Hopefully we'll have enough time for everyone to answer your questions. But if not, don't worry, we'll be on again and you'll be able to raise those questions again. We're going to be talking about religion, and of course with religion comes politics, and when you talk about Israel and Jerusalem, it's hard to avoid the politics. So please remember that I'm an Israeli. I drank a certain type of Kool-Aid here in the land of Israel. I try to be as objective as I can and give you the broad spectrum and the broad story so that you all can make your own decisions about certain things. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Hold on, let me just make sure all the buttons are pushed and make sure that we get everything. Very good. Okay, we are ready to go. We are starting our tour in the beginning, and the beginning is over here. Anybody recognize where this is? I'm assuming, oh, I left the pictures in the background. If you can pay attention here, you probably notice this is the Federation building in St. Louis. And we're using an amazing technology that Google is providing for us. And I'm very thankful for that. And this allows us to use several technologies, virtual reality and 360 views to really feel like we're actually walking around in Jerusalem. So from here, we're going to take off and fly. Karen, I'm sure you wish too, that the flight to Israel would be this short and this comfortable. This is a good 15-hour flight with all the connections on the way. But we landed in Jerusalem. Look at this. Here we are on Mount of Olives and the beautiful view that we have here of the Temple Mount and the old city of Jerusalem. And right below us is, we call this area the Holy Basin. And essentially the 3 monotheistic religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism call Jerusalem a holy city. And a lot of what we're seeing here around this golden dome, which today is called the Dome of the Rock, or the Temple Mount, or Haram el-Sharif in Arabic. And a little bit, we'll zoom in a little bit farther. You can see here 2 gray domes. That's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus is believed to, by most of the Christian world, was crucified, buried, and resurrected. And this is about maybe 500 yards from the Temple Mount to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So this is really where it all started for these three monotheistic religions. And we're on Mount of Olives to the east, and all of these religions believe that the Mashiach will arrive, and Mashiach, actually Messiah, connects to Hanukkah because the Messiah, the word Mashiach comes from anointment, and the kings were anointed with olive oil, and of course olive oil, very important element in our story of Hanukkah, but that's another session that we'll have later on. So one of my favorite things to do when we start a tour in Jerusalem is to read a poem. And of course, my favorite Jerusalem poet is Yehuda Amichai. He's a Jerusalemite, lived here in Jerusalem most of his life. And he has a beautiful perspective on the story of Jerusalem. So it's called The Ecology of Jerusalem. The air over Jerusalem is saturated with prayers and dreams, like the air over industrial cities. It's hard to breathe. And from time to time, a new shipment of history arrives, and the houses and the towers are its packing materials. Later, these are discarded and piled up in dumps. And sometimes candles arrive instead of people, and then it's quiet. And sometimes people come instead of candles, and then there's noise. And in enclosed gardens heavy with jasmine, foreign consulates like wicked brides have been that have been rejected lie in wait for their moments. And in a way, I would read it as wicked brides. Maybe that makes a different connection for people. But when you think about what candles symbolize in Judaism, all of the discarded materials, the archaeology, the layers of history that we're going to go through and talk about in Jerusalem, there's some beautiful connections here that I really think are a great way to start our tour. So let's dive into Jerusalem. We're going to hop over and start from the western side, from actually, oops, supposed to start in the beginning, not in scene 14. Here we go. So our first scene, we're actually back on Mount of Olives over here. We'll see some interesting things that I put out here, because what we saw before, the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount area, down below here is where the city actually starts, and we call it the City of David. So this ridge over here, I'll point it out again in the picture, this is where the city starts between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago with the Jebusites, which are a group of people that are, we call them Canaanites in general, the groups that lived here before the entry of the Israelites in the 1200 BCE. So let's say 3,200 years ago. And about 3,000 years ago, David conquers the city from the Jebusites, and it becomes the capital city of the Israelite kingdom. It's important to mention that it's Israelite and not Jewish, because Israelite meaning all 12 tribes. And then David was a bit of a bad boy. He also conquered a lot of areas, and eventually he wanted to build at the top of the hill a temple, but God says your hands are stained with blood. You did some things you weren't supposed to, and therefore your son Solomon, Shlomo, which by the way, Shlomo and Yerushalayim have similar letters in Hebrew. Shlomo comes from Shalem, from Shalom. So David, who was the conqueror, his son Solomon is the one who builds the temple up here on Mount Moriah, and where the Golden Dome is known as Mount Moriah. In Judaism, we have some connections to this specific location. First of all, we believe that Adam and Eve, when they were banished from the Garden of Eden, were brought down to this world on the top of Mount Moriah, on a piece of rock that we call the foundation stone, the foundation of the world. 1,000 years or 2,000 years later, depending on which calendar you're following, Abraham is told to take his son that he loves and to go to a place that God will show him. In the Bible, it says Eretz HaMoriah, the land of Moriah. So if you know any Moriahs, and it's a fairly popular name, Moriah comes from two words in Hebrew, more, teacher, or also someone who shows where something is. And Yah is two letters out of the four letters of the Israelite God. So Moriah literally means the place where God will show you. And in Judaism, we believe that Abraham binds his son Isaac as a sign of belief in God. And that, of course, we call the Brit or bris, as you say in North America. And of course, oh, we didn't get to him yet. And of course, when we have a new child born in Judaism, we have a celebration and we call it the bris or the Brit, when we bring that child into the covenant of Abraham and Jacob. 1,000 years after David, there's a guy named Herod, and this is him over here. Herod is Jewish, I like to say. He was raised as a Jew. He's a grandson of a woman who was force converted into Judaism, Edomite. And his relationship with the Jewish people was only so-so. He probably kept kosher and probably had a bar mitzvah and probably went to synagogue on occasion. But for the most part, he was acting more like a Roman. And when the Romans take over about 2,000 years ago, Herod creates a new area here by the temple, and we're going to see some pictures and talk about the platform that he builds here to make the temple the area more flat and have more space for building the temple. But all that, I'm jumping ahead. Let's head to the western side of the city. We're here at Jaffa Gate, named that way because the road to Jaffa leads to the west. It's also called the Gate of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs because this road to the south in this direction leads to Bethlehem and then Hebron, where the Machpelah cave is, the place where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah are buried, not Rachel. Rachel did not make it to be buried there. She dies in Bethlehem and buried near Bethlehem. But right here in Jaffa Gate is where our story is going to start. And you can see here what we call the Tower of David. It's got nothing to do with David, but the Crusaders, when they came here 900 years ago, decided that it's the best strategic spot to build the palace and the fortress for the king. So therefore, it must be where David had his palace. So they named this area the David Citadel. Today, we know that the city where David started Jerusalem is way down in the valley on the other side of this hill. So the walls we see here are confusing because these are walls from the Ottomans only 500 years ago. So it's important to understand when we look at different elements of the city that Jerusalem has 27 different layers of history. And in archaeology and in history, we call this a tell. When there's layers upon layers of new groups that are coming in, they take over the city. Usually there's a conflict, so the city is destroyed. And then on top of that rubble, there's a new city, a new culture that takes over. So in Jerusalem, there's no less than 27 different groups. We're not going to get into all of them, just the main ones. But important to understand that a lot of what we see today is not necessarily where this all started. One of the amazing things about Jerusalem that I think is very important for us, and that's really the subject of what we are going to talk about, is this idea that it's important for the three monotheistic religions. And this, of course, is one of my favorite bumper stickers. By the way, most of us here don't like to call it coexist, but rather exist, because we believe that we all have a right to exist. We're all here as part of this land. And nowhere in the land is it more complicated and sophisticated than in Jerusalem. The city is divided into four different areas or four different quarters. Now, if you understand math, then you think a quarter should mean that the four quarters are equal. However, that's not the case. As you can see, Muslim quarter is the largest, then the Christian quarter, then the Jewish quarter, and then the Armenian quarter is the smallest. And also notice that there's an area here that's not even considered in any of the quarters, and that is the Temple Mount, the platform built by King Herod, which we'll talk about soon. But this area doesn't officially belong to any of the quarters. This division is from the time of the Ottomans, and even before that, the division was made by Queen Millicent of the Crusader period, 900 years ago. And she was looking at the map of Jerusalem, and she is a devout Christian, and she says, I think I need the map to have a cross in it. I mean, it's Jerusalem, it's the holy city of Jerusalem. So that's why there's an Armenian quarter added in here, because there are only 3 religions, so that looks more like a peace sign than it does a cross. So she added the Armenian quarter, and the Armenians are the first group to become Christian. It's the first kingdom to turn Christian, 321 CE, or to the Common Era. And they were honored by Queen Millicent, and since then we have the 4 quarters and the cross on the map. So let's move into the city through Jaffa Gate once again, and this is again Ottoman, from the Ottoman period, 500 years ago or so. What's interesting is we have a mezuzah here. Why a mezuzah? Because if you remember in Deuteronomy, when it says that we should put a mezuzah, the name of God, on our doorsteps, the entire sentence is V'samtam al mezuzot beitecha uvishe'arecha, in the entrance to your homes and at your gates. And this is a gate of a city, so therefore we have a mezuzah in here. And of course, the famous Jerusalem bagel that you can dip in the zatar and the hyssop. This is a very important custom, and usually when I have a group coming in, we'll get some of this Jerusalem bagel, Jerusalem bread, and have some food to remember the entrance to Jerusalem. By the way, one of the first important ceremonies that took place in Jerusalem way back when Abraham comes to Jerusalem, is Abraham and Sarah went to Egypt. They become wealthy, and when they come back, they're greeted by King Melchizedek of Jerusalem. And King Melchizedek, which is interesting because Malchi is the king of, Tzedek is, it's like tzedakah, righteousness. Interesting name for a king that is not really part of the story up until that point. He greets Abraham and Sarah at the entrance to the city, at the gate, and he treats them to bread and wine, which is what traditionally you would do with a respected visitor in your city. In Christianity, in essence, that is believed to be the first communion. It's the first time that there's a connection between Abraham, the father of the 3 religions, and sitting at the entrance of the city, Melchizedek, and the city that will become important for all of these religions. So in a way, it's the first ceremony like that of bread and wine that's done in the entrance to Jerusalem. This is the Tower of David, or the David Citadel. There's actually a moat here, as you can see. What's the problem with the moat in this part of the world? You don't want to waste your water on a moat. So as far as we know, there was never water placed in here. It's the Crusaders, again. They tend to build in a certain way. And of course, in Europe, there's a lot of water. And this is called the Citadel, which literally means, and this is the sort of a drawbridge when you go in, it's a bunker for the king. There's another set of walls that if the walls of the city fall, the king can retreat back and be protected even more. So we're heading into the Armenian quarter, and here we are at the middle of the Jewish quarter, at the Jewish quarter square. And what's interesting about the Jewish quarter is that in 1948, we had what we call the War of Independence, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, or the catastrophe. During that war, the old city of Jerusalem falls into the hands of the Jordanians. And in 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel is able to conquer, liberate, take over, depending on your politics. And the old city and the Temple Mount is once again in the hands of Israel, or once again available and accessible to Israelis and Jews. And during that war in 1948, this synagogue called Tiferet Israel, the glory of Israel, was the highest point in the Jewish quarter. So it was used by the defenders. Up here, they were able to shoot at the Jordanians. So this building was heavily bombarded and destroyed almost completely. So after 1967, the city rebuilt only an arch to remind us what this place used to look like. You can see the ruins over here. And in fact, the name of the synagogue was changed to the Churva or Churva synagogue, meaning the wreckage or the place that was destroyed. And it's still nicknamed that today, but here's what it looked like in the beginning. This is from the 1930s, before the War of Independence. And around 2005, there was a debate whether or not to rebuild it or to leave it with this picture, which symbolizes the destruction of Jerusalem and the rebuilding and all of that. You can see obviously who won. And it was rebuilt almost exactly to the way it was before. Inside, they actually kept, you can see some of the older looking walls are from the older version of the synagogue. So the Churva synagogue here in the center of the Jewish quarter. Something else that we were able to do when we were rebuilding the Jewish quarter, and you notice, I didn't point it out, but you probably noticed that a lot of these buildings around here are new. That's because they are new from at least after 1967. So when we were building up, we were also able to excavate below, and we found some pretty cool stuff. We found some of the Roman ruins of the Cardo of Jerusalem, the main street of Jerusalem, during the time of Hadrian. This is about 100 CE, a little bit after the crucifixion of Jesus and after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The temple is destroyed, the city is destroyed, but then Hadrian takes over and builds essentially a new city. He actually, Hadrian changes the name of the region from Judea. It's changed to Palestina. He's the first one to call it Palestine. And he also changes the name of the city of Jerusalem. It's no longer Jerusalem, it's Ilia Capitolina, the new capital, the new city. And he does that because he understands that the connection to the Jews, what keeps the Jews together, the glue, is the temple and Jerusalem itself and being connected to their land. So from this point on, Jews are not allowed into the area of Judea. They're not allowed into Jerusalem. Needless to say that in Judaism, Hadrian is not a very popular guy. Here's more of this Cardo, and the Cardo is the main street of Jerusalem during, as I said, the time of Hadrian. It's kind of like Main Street with the shops and everything on the streets. Between each of these pillars, there's a shop, and this was essentially the mall where people would come and buy their things. And there's a nice mural over here that gives us an idea of what this would have looked like with lots of people. The Romans believed that the world is flat and that it's connected together by two axes that are east-west and north-south. And the meeting point of both of these main street or main axes in all of their towns that they built in the same way, the meeting point of those streets in every city was the main area or the downtown of the city. The Cardo is north-south. The Decumanos is east-west. Don't worry about the terms. But everywhere you go in the Roman Empire, you would find the Cardo and the Decumanos. Now, what's really cool about this mural, and here's a close-up of this mural. The artist made a historical mistake. Obviously, ignore this woman over here who's a tourist that was taking a picture with it. But if you look closely, maybe you'll be able to find the historical mistake. I'll give you a second to see. If you see it, it'll jump out at you. It's something very obvious.
It's the boy with the cap.
Yes, somebody noticed. There's a boy here with a baseball cap. He's wearing a backpack and a plastic bottle sticking out of his bag. So it's not a mistake, it's done on purpose. And the reason for it is really to assert or to connect Jewish tradition from ancient Israel to modern Israel. He's talking to a young girl from the past, from the way she's dressed, and she's handing him a pomegranate. The pomegranate in Jewish tradition symbolizes the Torah. And there's a story, a nice idea that the Torah has 613 mitzvot, 613 good deeds that if you're a good Jew, you would do all 613 of them. And the story is that if you open up a pomegranate and count the seeds inside, you'll always get to 613. It's a nice story. I've tried it a few times. It doesn't work. I got to about 300 or 400. But the idea is that the Torah is filled with sweetness and a little bitter here and there as well, or tart, just like the pomegranate. And in fact, the two things that we put on the Torah scroll, on the wood pieces of the Torah scroll, are called rimonim in the tradition. So this is a way to connect old Israel or ancient Israel to modern Israel. And of course, moving down to the center of it all, here we are at the Western Wall. We came down from the Jewish quarter up above. It's funny, this area does not look like this anymore. There's a brand new, huge building, 3-story building that's built over here. It's going to be a visitor center of some sort. And of course, the Western Wall is the last remnant of the temple of the Jewish people. After David, we have Solomon who builds the temple. This is about 960 BCE. And then after Solomon dies, the kingdom splits, and we have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And there are 10 tribes in the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. This is in the beginning of Book of Kings, or the middle of the Book of Kings. And kingdom of Israel is taken over by the Assyrians in 720 BCE, and they exiled the 10 tribes to somewhere else. And since then, we're sort of looking for the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The two other tribes, mainly the tribe of Judah that remains in Jerusalem, continues to survive for another 150, 200 years. And eventually Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, comes to Jerusalem, destroys the temple. This is the temple that was built by Solomon, 586 BCE. What day of the year did this happen? Anybody remember? What day do we mark the destruction of the temple? It's the 9th of the month of Av, or Tisha B'Av, as you guys call it over there. And on the 9th of Av is when the temple is destroyed. Our people are exiled to Babylon. And after about 70 years, we come back, led by Ezra and Nehemiah, and rebuild the temple, Second Temple version 2.0. And then about 167 BCE, we have the story of the Maccabees. I forgot to mention that Alexander the Great conquers the area in about 300. And that is the second version of the Second Temple. Hanukkah, as you know, means dedication. So they rededicated the temple. But then came King Herod, led by the Romans, and he rebuilds the temple area completely. What he does is he looks at the Temple Mount and he says, not enough room, and I want to build some serious stuff. So he builds retaining walls all around Mount Moriah and creates a much larger platform to be able to build the temple itself, and another building here that housed the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of the people, and also the Knesset Gdolah, the large gathering of the people, essentially the parliament of the people of Israel. And this building is the temple itself. Now we're standing by the western wall, and before we were looking from this direction. This is the western side of it. And the area that we're looking at right now is a little piece of this wall over here. Okay, now what happened in 70 CE when the Romans take over Jerusalem, there's a big rebellion of the Jews against the Romans, and the Romans destroy the city, destroy the temple. And what they leave is only the retaining walls. Everything up here is totally destroyed. So when they tell you that the Western Wall is a piece, a remnant of the temple, that's not actually true. It's a remnant of the platform, the retaining wall that was holding up the platform on top of which the building of the temple was built. So this is the Western Wall, the most important place for our people. Let's get a little closer. Here we are in the men's section. And as you can see, the wall is made from different layers. The bottom, Herodian stone, Roman, 2,000 years ago. The smaller ones are Crusader, about 900 years ago. And then all the way at the top, this is already Ottoman and modern, about 500 years ago. What's interesting is that in here, the wall continues. What we're seeing here is only a very small piece of the temple that Herod built. Remember that it was this entire wall all the way. The piece we have today is only over here. There's a tour called the Western Wall Tunnels that you can walk along this wall. And it's called tunnels because essentially in 2,000 years, the city of Jerusalem expanded, and today the Muslim quarter comes all the way up to the wall. So the tunnels are actually underneath the Muslim quarter, and that's there is a possibility of going and seeing it, not on our tour today. And for those of you, the women that have been in the wall maybe many times, you've never actually been in here in the men's section. There's another area that you can walk in along the Western Wall and get to this arch over here, which is known as Wilson's Arch. And it's actually, here it is. It's part of the remnants of the temple as well, that archway that we saw in the model. So this is an area that's been open for a very long time, and unfortunately only on the men's side. But now that we're virtual, you guys can see it as well. And to be fair, here's the women's section as well at the Western Wall. And down here is also the new section by Robinson's Arch, known as the section of the people of Israel, Ezrat Yisrael, where families can stand together. It's a fairly new thing in the last few years. Okay, so now that we've talked Jewish, let's see what's the story with the Muslims in Jerusalem. So here we are, right by the Golden Dome. And the Golden Dome, known as the Dome of the Rock, in that direction, we can actually sort of see, we'll get there soon, the El Aqsa Mosque. The connection of Jerusalem to Islam is that, you know what, let's stop for a minute for questions before we continue, if there are any questions. Amy?
Actually, right now, I don't have any questions in the chat, Gotti. So if anyone has any questions about the Jewish quarter, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Something's wrong with Ami's password. Can you call Ami and see what the deal is? Thanks. Sorry, we have another session going on, so apparently something's wrong. At any rate, so no questions, that's okay. So Islam, in chapter 17 of the Quran, we have a story known as the night journey or the Miraj, where in that story, Muhammad has a dream. And in that dream, he gets on his winged horse that takes him to a place called El Aqsa. In Arabic, the farthest sacred place. From the most sacred, Mecca, to the farthest sacred place. And there he gets off his winged horse, he steps on a rock, and a sacred rock, and goes up to heaven and tries and has some conversations with Jibril, the angel Gabriel. And at the end of the night comes back down and gets on his horse and wakes up next to his wife in Mecca. So this dream, this night journey, the Miraj, is the connection of Islam to Jerusalem. In this building, and we'll go in very soon and see the actual stone inside, it's called the Dome of the Rock because it's protecting this sacred rock that Muhammad steps on. And next to it, the building over here at the southern end of the platform is known as El Aqsa, in other words, the farthest sacred place, from the connection from the story, chapter 17. This building is the oldest standing building in the Middle East. It's actually the parts of it at the bottom are built in 750 or so by a Muslim ruler that takes over this area. Islam takes over in 650 or so. Omar is the general that takes over the area. And this is built on top of the rock that Muhammad is believed to have stepped on. This building, as I said, is here from about 750. Our area, I don't know if you know this, has a lot of earthquakes, and many of the buildings in our area have been damaged significantly. The base of this building has been standing since 750, so about 1300 years ago. The top, though, the blue and the tiles, that's relatively new, made by the Ottomans about 200 or 300 years ago, about 150 years ago. Here we are inside the Dome of the Rock. And this is where I think it's important to note that the virtual tour allows us to go to places where usually we would not be able to go to. The Dome of the Rock is closed unless you're a Muslim. And I've been a tour guide for about 15 years and I've never been in this building. So you can see that it's got lines on the rug, just like any other mosque for people to pray towards Mecca. And it's, as I said, it's an octagon, essentially 8-sided building. And it protects, the dome here protects the middle over here, which is essentially the bedrock, the top of Mount Moriah. And this is also the foundation stone that Judaism believes is where Adam and Eve were brought here to start their life on this earth, and also where the binding of Isaac took place when Abraham brings Isaac here to Mount Moriah. So it's interesting that it's the same place. And of course, that makes things more complicated, as we well know. But this is the Dome of the Rock. Let's go see if we can go over to see the El Aqsa Mosque. Oh, here's another picture of the Dome of the Rock inside. We already saw that. Here we are, the Dome of the Rock over there, right outside the El Aqsa Mosque. Now, this building has been damaged significantly in the past 1300 years. And most of what you're seeing inside the building is actually Ottoman, from relatively new, 300-400 years. The facade of the building is from the Crusader period. During the Crusader period, there was a group of knights that were assigned to take over and to take care of this area of the Temple Mount. And the Crusaders, who were bad historians and even worse archaeologists, did not know what these buildings are. They actually decided that this Muslim building is the original temple that Solomon built, and they called it Solomon's Temple. And the building of El Aqsa Mosque, they believed was the stable where the horses of Solomon, in the Bible, it talks about Solomon having a lot of horses and carriages, and that this is chariots, actually. So this group of knights were known as the Knights Templar. And here's where the story gets a little fiction, or we don't have enough evidence. Dan Brown, of course, made a lot of money off these stories, that the Templars one day found some kind of treasure, the Holy Grail, the treasures of the temple, who knows. But one day they said, enough of this, we're leaving, we're going back to Europe. and they went to Europe. They became very, very, very rich. And till this day, there's all kinds of stories about what happened to the Templars, because at some point they became so rich, they were a threat to the church. And the Pope on Friday the 13th, and I never forget the year, 11 something, I think, decided to get rid of the Templars. They were slaughtered, hundreds of them, and they went underground, and since then they've disappeared. So in many ways, this is, of course, myth and stories, and who knows how much of it is actually true. But back to Islam. Islam and Judaism are very similar. In fact, the 5 pillars of Islam, or the main elements of Islam, talk about fasting during Ramadan, a Hajj, or a pilgrimage to Mecca, the concept of one God and that Muhammad is the messenger, and giving to charity. And I'm sure I forgot something, but I'll remember in a moment. But the ideas of Judaism and Islam are actually very similar. Let's go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself. When Muslims go into the mosque, they wash their feet over here, their feet from their knees down, and their arms from their elbows down as well, and leave your shoes at the entrance, and then walk into this mosque. And again, a lot of what you see here of this building is Crusader, about 900 years ago. Continuing farther in, the mosque is actually a very long building, most of it facing to the south. Why to the south? Because Muslims pray towards Mecca, and the direction of Mecca is to the south. And below this, we're at the second level already below. Even farther down, these arches are still there today. These arches were created by King Herod 2,000 years ago. And in fact, the mosque is sitting on 3 layers of these arches that are holding up the platform where the temple was built before. So this tunnel comes out, if we would go through this wall over here, we would be in a place called the Southern Steps, and that's our next point, actually. That's our next, oh, maybe it isn't. Okay, we'll come back to that. We're going to talk Christianity now. We moved to about 500 yards from where the Temple Mount is, and we're right outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Sepulchre is a fancy word for tomb. So this is the place where, according to Christianity, Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected. And the building that we see was created after 325 CE, when Constantine, the Roman Emperor of Rome, decides to move the center of the Roman Empire from Rome farther to the east. Actually, he had some issues with his brother and they split up, but we won't get into that too much. But the bottom line is that the new center of the Roman Empire was now a city called Byzantium. And when he took over the city, he changes the name of the city from Byzantium to Constantinople, which I'm sure you guys now know what I'm talking about, Istanbul of today. And he does a very important thing. He decides that he needs a religion to unify all of the pieces of his large empire. And he chooses the religion of Christianity. And at that point, Christianity becomes a religion that's allowed in the Roman Empire. And a few generations later, there was another Roman emperor that decided to make it the official religion of the Roman Empire, and nothing else was allowed already at that point. The mother of Constantine, a woman by the name of Helena, comes to the Holy Land to find the locations where the stories of Jesus from the New Testament took place. And she comes to Jerusalem and to Bethlehem and the Sea of Galilee and identifies a lot of these locations where Jesus performed his miracles and where the crucifixion was, where he was born in Bethlehem, and so on. This is a drawing from 1850 of the entrance to the church. David Robinson paints this, very interesting guy. And as you can see today, it hasn't changed much. And we're going to go into the church. In 1850, there was a big earthquake. So the clock tower, the bell tower was destroyed. And it should have been about twice the height of what you see here. And since 1850, it wasn't renovated and wasn't rebuilt. We entered the church. This is the entrance. And instead of going directly up, which we'll do very soon, we're now entering into the church itself. And we see down here an area known as the Stone of Unction. And we'll talk about it very soon. This is where the body of Jesus was prepared for burial. But before that, let's go up to the rock of Golgotha. So if we came up from over here, we're looking at the top of the hill known as Calvary or Golgotha, where Jesus was placed on the cross. So over here is the crucifix, and this person is kneeling underneath an altar and putting their hand through to be able, you can see it covered in plexiglass here on the sides, to be able to touch the rock of Golgotha. There are people usually line up through the door to be able to go through this and actually touch the rock itself. And as you can see, there's a difference in the way the rooms look. Over here is the Catholic section. You can see the Catholics have a lot less ornaments and stuff like that. This is the Greek Orthodox section with a lot of candles and incense and things like that. And there's another room over here that actually belongs to the Armenians. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a modern miracle. There are 5 different denominations in here that are not always getting along together. Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Armenians, Coptic, and who am I forgetting? It'll come to me, maybe the Ethiopians I didn't mention. At any rate, these denominations usually get along with each other, but not always. And sometimes there were some fights and stabbings and things like that about who really owns, which of the denominations owns some of this of these areas, because of course everyone wants to have and rule or monitor the area where the crucifixion was, and everyone wants to have possession of the tomb itself. So about 20 years ago, with the coordination of the Pope, all 5 denominations get together every year and they create a schedule which they follow religiously, pun intended, in order to make sure that they all know exactly when the Catholics have access to Golgotha, when the Ethiopians do, when the Greek Orthodox, during Easter, who has access to the tomb. The room of the Last Supper is involved in this as well, and so is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So since then, the fights are a lot less dramatic, and they always refer to the status quo agreement, which is what they call that ability to sit down and figure it out. So let's go down the stairs here from Golgotha. We'll actually go back to the Stone of Unction in here, and we'll look at this mosaic on the wall here that tells the rest of the story. Jesus is crucified on the cross above us to the right on the rock of Golgotha. He's then taken down from the cross. By the way, this is a special permission that was given to Joseph of Arimathea, a person of influence on the Romans, that asked special permission to take the body down and bring him to burial. Usually, the Romans would leave anyone that they crucified on the cross to rot. And there was always a sign here, you can see it over here, that says essentially what is the crime of this person that was crucified. In the case of Jesus, it's the initials of Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So when you see crucifixes in all around the Christian world, there's usually a sign with initials that, as I said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That was the accusation that he was rebelling against the Romans. And for the Jews, he was essentially a false Messiah, which is why the Jews didn't object to the crucifixion of Jesus. So he's taken down by the disciples, and some of the, this is Mary, the mother, that's holding him over here. And then the next scene is the middle, the stone of unction that we're going to see here in the middle. It's a slab of stone where the body of Jesus was prepared for the burial. In fact, in Jewish tradition, the dead was anointed or was smeared with olive oil as a way of allowing them or giving them a status of importance. So he's anointed as well and wrapped in shrouds, which is the way Judaism traditionally, we bury our dead not in caskets or coffins, but rather in a wrapped in shrouds. And here he's already being placed into the cave. And in Judaism back then, we did not bury someone in a casket, or in a singular cave, but rather in a cave that was a family cave. And the family cave that Jesus is buried in, remember, he's not from Jerusalem. In fact, he's from the Galilee. So where he is buried is a tomb, a fresh tomb, it says in the Bible, donated by Joseph of Arimathea. And this is what we can see here in the main rotunda. What's interesting about this rotunda is you need a lot of imagination, because really what this was a hill with a cave at the side of the hill. Nowadays, it's hard to see because it's really a building in the middle of a big rotunda, because what happened is the different variations of the church, eventually the church was rebuilt several times and the sides of the hill were chipped away. And eventually they needed to create a structure where inside there's actually the cave where Jesus was buried. So again, one of the cool things about the virtual is that we can show you what the inside looks like. Because normally, and there's a funny story actually, I don't remember the year, was it the last group or the group before? We were in here and there was an Israeli talk show host that was there to tell a story, and we walked by him and he wanted to ask some of the groups. And he asked me, do you know who I am? And I said, of course, you're Aleksansky. And he told us a story about how his father was a mosaic artist that was hired by the Armenian church to fix the crucifixion mosaic. And he's Jewish. And the father needed a real human model to do the face and the body of Jesus. So his son, the nice Jewish boy from Jerusalem, was the model for dad to make sure the dimensions of the Jesus on the crucifix were human-like and looked kind of appropriate. And when you look at his picture of this talk show host and the face of Jesus, there is some similarity. Anyway, we were on national TV. They interviewed some of the group, members of the group. It was a lot of fun. So the inside of the tomb, here's finally what the inside looks like. And the inside is a slab of stone that is believed to be where the body of Jesus was placed when he was buried. Now, the tradition of the burial back then is that the body is placed on this slab of stone, and it's left there for about a year. The stone is closed over, and the body is left there for a year. And after a year, the family comes back. By that point, most of the body is decayed, and they put the bones into a box, which is essentially a box where the remains of their ancestors would be placed in as well. So in the Bible, it says about several characters that they died and gathered with their forefathers. It means literally the remains of their bones that were buried were placed in that box, in that stone box, together with the ashes and the bones of their ancestors. So about 2 years ago, they did a very nice renovation of this whole area. And one of the things that they did is they lifted up this slab of stone to see what's underneath. And of course, this is a dramatic moment, because if they find a skeleton underneath, then we're in trouble. There's a National Geographic's movie that is very cool, a documentary that talks to the archaeologists, of course, and the priests that are there and everyone. So underneath, by the way, they found another slab of stone from the Byzantine era. They didn't go even farther below, or if they did, they didn't tell anybody. But this is the inside of the tomb. All right, we have a couple more minutes. Let's go from here to Mount Zion. We're at the southern steps, so just want to show you these. There's 3 arches over here. These are close up. The tunnel that we showed you before underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque is blocked up by these entrances, or these arches. So if we went through these arches, we would go in a tunnel underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque and end up on top of the Temple Mount. And these tunnels are still here today. Unfortunately, they're not open to the public. I would love to be able to go through here and see it. And maybe someday when peace in the Middle East will actually make it. And these are very important steps for both Judaism and Christianity, because these are the actual steps from the temple that Herod built 2,000 years ago. And in the Christian Bible, there's a mention of Jesus in Jerusalem during the holiday of Sukkot, where he stands at the top of the steps at the entrance to the temple. And he says that anyone who is thirsty for knowledge and for the love of God should come to him. And this is one of the very few places in archaeology where we can say, these are the steps. This event that's talked about, I think, in the book of Luke, is here, right here at the top of the steps. This is where Jesus stood and said this sentence. In Judaism, we sing and talk about these steps every Friday and Saturday, because during Shabbat, we have an additional prayer that we add to Birkat Hamazon, the prayer for the food. And that's called Shir HaMa'alot, the Song of Ascent, or Ma'alot in Hebrew is another word for steps. There are about 25 different songs of ascent in the book of Psalms. And these are songs that we sing every Shabbat to remind us that the temple is not there anymore, and to remind us of the abundance in our life that God gives us, not just food, but of course, everything else. So these are important steps for the Jewish people. And a couple more places to talk about. We're outside of the walls of the old city. This is Zion Gate. We're going towards Mount Zion. Look at the bullet holes here on the gate. These are from 1967, when the Israeli army breaks into the old city. They broke in through here to get to the Jewish quarter, which is the closest from here. And these were left on purpose by Israel to remind us that there was a war waged here, and to remind us that there were some people who lost their lives to be able to live freely and to liberate Jerusalem. Mount Zion is important in the Christian tradition and in the Jewish tradition and in the Muslim tradition because of 2 things. This is one of the churches commemorating one of the stories that we'll talk about in a moment. The main event on Mount Zion is the place that is believed to be the place of the Last Supper. Now look at this hall over here. This is believed to be where the Last Supper took place. Jesus and the disciples are in Jerusalem on Passover, the year 29 to 31, somewhere in one of those years, we're not sure. And they go to a place on, we think Mount Zion. It was said to have been nearby to where King David is buried. But there's a problem with this room. This room is Crusader era. These are Gothic arches, Crusader architecture. So this is definitely not the room of the Last Supper. However, it's very possible that underneath was perhaps the actual place where the Last Supper took place. I started to tell you that Helena, the mother of Constantine, 325 CE, builds the churches in the Holy Land. In the year 1001, there's a Muslim king that decides to destroy all of the churches. Word travels to Europe, and in 1099, the Crusaders arrive in the land and they rebuild a lot of the things that were destroyed. So this is a Crusader church marking the place of the Last Supper. But then the Crusaders were thrown out in 1250 by the Mamelukes. There's no Papaluks, in case you were wondering. The Mamelukes, Muslims from Egypt, they push out the Crusades and they take over. And really what they do is they like the way the Crusaders built stuff. So a lot of the things are just changed into mosques. So this is really a church that was built by the Crusaders on top of a church built by the Byzantines, Helena and Constantine. And it's changed into a mosque. There's no crucifix, there's no pictures of Jesus or anything like that. In fact, there's a mihrab, which is a prayer niche marking the direction to Mecca. And a lot of the writing on the wall here you can see is in Arabic, quotes from the Quran. One day of the year, Christian denominations are allowed to come here to celebrate the Last Supper. You can imagine how much of a tight schedule that is. It's during Easter, of course, when the story would have taken place. Actually, the Thursday before Good Friday is when all of this takes place. And during the rest of the year, this is a tourist attraction, essentially open to the public. Right below us, literally below us, is the tomb of King David. What does that mean, the tomb of King David? We believe that King David is buried over here. I couldn't find a picture inside, but here's what it looks like inside. It's the marker. These gentlemen are praying on a big marker of the tomb of King David. So down below would be the place where King David is buried according to certain traditions. And if you remember, the reason the room of the Last Supper is believed to be where it is because in the tradition in Christianity, it says that they were having the Passover Seder nearby to where King David is buried. There's some arguments about whether or not this is the tomb of King David. Some scholars say the Bible says that David was gathered with his forefathers. Where is David from? He's not from Jerusalem. He's originally from Hebron, but lived in Bethlehem. So his forefathers would be buried there. On the other hand, it does say that he was buried in his city, Jerusalem. Whether it was here on Mount Zion or not, that's a whole other question, but this is a tradition, just like where the location of Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. And as you know, Fiddler on the Roof already taught us that you don't mess with tradition. So therefore, these are the places that people believe that are the true places. Excellent. I think that'll be enough for one evening. Thank you for listening. I hope it wasn't too difficult and problematic to follow through. I know there was a lot of dates and a lot of time periods, and next time we'll try to sort it out a little bit. But really, this land comes from about 5,000 years ago. We have the beginning of this, of the time that people lived here. If you go even back the Chalcolithic period, it could be even 10,000 years, but the story really starts about 5,000 years ago. So it's a lot to cover, and Jerusalem, as we said, is the center of a lot of these religions, and it's probably the most complicated city that I know of in this region because of the proximity of the holy sites and because everybody wants a piece of these holy sites. And hopefully, Gadi Bendov that lives in Israel, I pray and hope that there will be peace in Jerusalem and that we'll all be able to go where we want to go and worship the way we want to, and be able to respect each other. And I hope that my children at least will be able to do that. Okay, and with that, a holiday of hope and tradition. Hanukkah symbolizes the holiday of chasing the darkness and bringing the light and making the world a better place. So I'm gonna bring over our Chanukah Chanukiah. By the way, I hope you guys know it's not a menorah. The menorah is what was burning in the temple. This is a Chanukiah. So we're gonna light our Chanukiah. It's the fourth night of Chanukah. And hopefully my wife Amy will bring it over in a moment, and we'll light the candles together. We'll say the blessings. And do we have any questions, Karen, or I forgot about the questions?
We actually do have one question, but before we get to the
Okay.
question, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Our next session will be January 10th, where we will spend time along the Mediterranean coastline in a session called Kings and Ports. If you are interested in current events, every Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock Central Time, Gadi has a current event update that he brings. It's a very informal and very informative. So if you go to israelvirtualtour.com, you can register. I will send the link again with the recording later on. And I want to wish everybody a very safe and meaningful holiday season. We'll light the menorah, and then I will ask the question that's sitting here in the inbox.
Okay, very good. All right, so this is our fancy Chanukiah. And even though it's a little hard to use the shamash for these candles, so we're using a different one. This is, no, I didn't. This is actually solid olive oil in these containers, so it's really the real deal. And let's say the blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avoteinu bayamim ha'el b'azman hazeh. Amen. And I don't know if I mentioned, but we are actually in the city of Modi'in, the city where the Maccabees are from, and very symbolic that we're lighting the candles here where it all began. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. And I'll sit back down and answer the question. And here's Bean, my son, who wants to say hi. You want to say hi?
Hi.
Here, he's going to come say hi in a moment. His name is Ori. He actually was born in Hanukkah. Ori means my light. Come, Bean, come say hi.
Hi.
Okay, so this is Ori, but we call him Bean. So because
Yes.
Ori is not really part of the lexicon here. So Bean, you want to help me answer the question?
Which is?
I don't know. Let's hear.
Okay, so the question is, of the three religions, which has the most tourists that visit Jerusalem each year?
I'll let you guys guess that. It's by far Christians. 75% of tourism in Israel is Christian. It's interesting, we do not get a lot of Muslim tourists because of issues with the conflict. There were a lot of folks from Egypt, Turkey, naming some Muslim countries, Indonesia, and the Muslim countries of all the stans up there, former Soviet Union. Maybe now, with all of these peace treaties and agreements that are signed, there will be more Muslim tourists. But I'd say maybe 5% Muslim, 75% Christian.
Can I say
And
something?
sure.
Every question about the old city, they know. Amy and Gotti, no matter what, any question you ask.
And the poor
Yes,
kid is
they
saying
know.
that because whenever we go take the kids to the old city, we end up telling them stories and they're like, oh no, not again. Don't tell us more stories. At any rate,
We have one more question from
yes.
Marcia. What is the effect of moving the embassy?
That's an interesting question. I'd say most Israelis were felt positive about it. For Israel, it's a no-brainer because we see the Jerusalem as our capital. It always has been since 1951, right after the Declaration of Independence. But some Israelis, I think, felt that it wasn't a good timing in the sense of the relationship with the Palestinians. But it does, I think in a way, it will give other countries that might be considering doing this the push that they needed. The Czech Republic, who's always been a very good friend of Israel, has not exactly moved the embassy, but they've said that they're planning to do so. And perhaps there'll be more, I think Guatemala maybe, and a few African countries. There's a lot of politics involved, but I think that this was a good thing for Israel. Of course, the Palestinians were not happy about it because remember that Israel, Jerusalem in the partition plan in 1947, that the whole concept of the state of Israel is built on. Now the dog wants to come say hello as well. So Jerusalem was supposed to be an international city. So in a way, Jerusalem is not claimed by, or can't be claimed by either side. So the fact that Israel claims it to be the capital, the Palestinians want it to be the capital as well, and moving the embassy was perceived by the Palestinian people as a very bad move for them. I hope that answered the question. I don't know if that was what you were asking.
I think so, but they can always join you on Wednesday for your
Absolutely.
current events.
Wednesday, 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. by you, actually, I think. Israel update, we talk about all kinds of fun stuff. And the last couple of weeks, there's some fun things going on. It looks like we're going towards an election. So we'll see. Okay, my friends,
Again, thank you very much, Gotti. And we look forward to seeing everybody on January 10th at 11:30. And again, wishing everybody a safe and very meaningful holiday season. Thank you again.
Chag Sameach, happy Hanukkah. Thank you, everyone. Lehitraot.
Thank you, Gotti.
My pleasure.